I don't even know what to say. So I just threw gas in this thing. I'm still trying to like work this out. This is kind of crazy, really. So I just put like a gallon and a half, maybe 2 gallons of gas in it. Turned the key on, flipped the petcock on. Petcock was off. So I flipped the petcock on. I'm just gonna put you guys down for a second. And it fires right up. Like, you can't make this stuff up. So, granted, there's some loud popping. You could tell one of the idle circuits is clogged up, but I bought the bike expecting to go through the carbs. I don't even know if I'm gonna touch them now. All right, so our last video did not go as planned. So I ended up getting the Bandit started, and it started perfectly, but what happened is, once I got the bike started, I realized it was backfiring pretty bad. So the previous owner's claims of starts out perfectly nonetheless, but the previous owner's claims on having fuel leaking out of the bike are definitely valid. What I found is this number 4 cylinder was leaking around the flow pole gasket right here, and also this carb intake gasket. So what I did is I ordered up new O-rings for these intake boots right here, and I also ordered up new O-rings for the carbs. The diaphragm seemed good. I took the bike for a ride, and it seemed, once I got out like 3,000 or 4,000 RPMs, it really started to open up, but it was breaking up at certain points, so I knew that something was up with the carbs. So what we're gonna do now is start tearing this thing apart. Turns out we're gonna have to take off the tank, end up rebuilding the carburetors, probably just pull back the air box, replace this intake manifold, gasket, and just go from there. Okay, so step 1 is gonna be to pull off our gas tank so we can get to the carburetors. So the first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and get these 2 10mm bolts off. Then I'm gonna go ahead and get our fuel hose disconnected out of the bottom here, and definitely make sure your fuel's off too. But I'm gonna go ahead, I already got the clamp off. I'm gonna pull this hose back. I'm gonna get a rag real quick to do that. And then we're gonna have to find the fuel level sensor. It's gonna be easier to find that once we pull off these 2 10mm bolts and then take the fuel hose off, because then we can just pull the tank up a little bit and see where it's actually connected to. So I'm gonna go ahead now, pull the tank off, and get back to you guys in a second. All right, little update on the Bandit over here. We got Dillion out there. We already got the tank off actually, so we ended up having to pull these 2 bolts off that hold these rear fairings in, and these rear fairings actually would clip into the tank at these little nubs right here. So those would go into the bottom of the tank over here, and that was holding this up, but we ended up getting that out of the way. We ended up finding the fuel level sensor that was at the back of the tank. It was just a little clip. We popped that off, got the fuel line off, noticed that was ripped. So we went over here, found out this fuel line actually had a rip in it, so I'm gonna have to replace the fuel line, and we're gonna start digging into the carbs now. All right guys, so it's been a few days, but we're back. We're finally working on the Bandit again. Get my hat out of the way. So where we left off is we were trying to take the airbox off. So what I did is I started to take the airbox off. We got all the clamps loose on the intake and on the airbox right here. I got my throttle cables loose as well. Obviously took the fuel line off, got my fuel sensor off, and what ended up happening is we started to pull back the airbox. I had my friend over at Dylan, and he was helping me out, but we started to pull back the airbox. We're like, man, this thing like really won't go. And towards the end, I noticed these 2 little tabs in the airbox. The lighting is not the best here, so it's kind of hard to see, but those tabs screw in to the frame right here. So we had to loosen those 2 tabs up so we could finally pull the airbox back a little bit and actually get the carbs out. But even in order to get to these screws, we had to take the whole back cowl off. So you can see I got the whole rear cowl off the bike now. Got that over there with the seat. And yeah, so what I'm going to do now is just get these 2 bolts loose on each side, and then go ahead and see if we can just pull this airbox enough to finally get the carburetors out. But yeah, time to ruin my fingers getting this out. I'll update you guys in a second. We're just going to pull this off, get the carbs out, get to the cleaning. All right, so we're cutting to us actually pulling the carburetors out. So once I got those 2 bolts out, I was able to finagle this airbox a little bit. is able to work the carbs actually out of the intake manifold on the engine. So now they're halfway out. At this point, they're going to get caught up on the throttle cable. So what we're going to have to do is first take off this choke cable, get that out the way. I already loosened these up before I even pulled the carburetors out, which is probably necessary. And this part gets a little tricky, but we're going to go ahead and see if we can pop this off. Got this one off one-handed. And we'll see if we can get the second one off. I might have to put the camera down for this. Yeah, that's going to have to happen. So I'll cut to us actually pulling these out in a second, guys. Cut to us getting the carburetors out. So this is what they look like out. We can already see that our fuel line's actually slit down the middle here. The GoPro won't focus in enough, but trust me, it is. I think while I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and replace all these seals as well. It kind of looks like these were leaking at some point. So when I'm rebuilding carburetors, I like to just buy everything. Everything that's even a chance of being wrong, I just go ahead and buy it. You might as well, because if you don't go ahead and fix it now and that ends up being a problem, now you're in it twice the time. And I think my time is worth more than the $50 that I'm going to spend on extra parts that I don't need. And if it's a bike you're selling anyway, you can just put that in the ad, and it's just adding insurance to the buyer, you know. I like to sell my bikes to friends, so the last thing I want is my friend to go ahead and buy this beautiful Bandit right here, and then a month down the road they have a problem because I rebuilt the carbs somewhat shoddy. So we're going to go ahead now and replace all the seals in it. Got the carbs off. Something to note while you're actually pulling the carburetors off is to watch out for these intake clamps, because you could just so easily maul these and they'll never get back to their original shape. So that's just something to be mindful of when you do actually pull out the carburetors. But while we're in here, we're going to pull these intake manifold boots off, and we're going to replace the O-ring that sits between the boots and the head right here. I'm going to go ahead and do those as well, because it looked like the one on number 4 over here was leaking. And again, if I'm going to do one, I might as well do them all. It's 6 more bolts to do the rest, so might as well just do it right. So yeah, I'm going to get my parts now. Actually, I left my parts back at the house, so we're going to get the parts now, get back to it. I'll show you guys how to rebuild these carburetors. Many hours later, we were back to the shop, and I just got the carb parts over here. These are the seals I'm going to replace that go in between each carburetor right here. There's 2, these are like double-ended, so there's 2 right here, 2 right here, and 2 right here. I think I just missed all that, but it's a little hard to tell where these carbs are exactly leaking from. So it really looks like it's in with this joint right here. The lighting doesn't pick it up well, but there's a lot of like yellow hazing in this area. So it's either those or the float bowl gaskets, which look a little bit wet as well. But I mean, this looks wet, so it's really hard to see. I'm just going to go ahead and replace them both, though. Like I said earlier, if you even think it's a problem, might as well just go ahead and replace it if it's not too expensive. So in order to replace these seals, we actually got to start splitting the carb rack apart. So what I'm going to have to do now is loosen this rail is what holds all these carbs together. So there's a rail on this side of the carbs, and then there's a rail on this bottom side. So the rail right here. So I'm gonna have to take out these 8 screws and these 8 screws, and then we're gonna slowly break them apart. Be careful when you're breaking these carbs apart, or any carbs apart, because this is your throttle linkage right here, and this is a pain to put all back together. So if you can, just get away with just replacing the seals and just slowly, or like a little bit at a time, pulling these apart. That's really the way to do it, and that's what I'm gonna try to do here. So yeah, we're gonna get to it. So I got the little brass piece out that connects the fuel gallery between the 2 carbs. I got that out, and we're gonna go ahead and replace it with the new ones right now. Honestly, these weren't too bad. This isn't the bad side. This is the side with all like the fuel residue. You can see it's kind of yellow on this side as compared to how gray these bowls are. But they do look pretty crusty. Granted, no cracks in them, so like they're not really an obvious spot to leak from, but it's better that we're going ahead and replacing them now. I mean, the other 2 are probably going to be worse on this side, so I'm just going to slap the new ones in. The inside of it looks a little cruddy, so I'll just blow that out with the air compressor too. It's getting pretty late night, but we went ahead and got all the O-rings replaced in between these fuel galleries right here. The old ones are getting pretty bad. You can see this one's kind of cut in half. I mean, they were cracking and whatnot, so it's a good thing that I went ahead and did that. I'm not sure if that was the leak, but anyways, we ended up going through. I ended up doing these 3 carbs so far. I'm going to go ahead and just do this last carb for you now. So the first thing we're going to want to do is get our float bowl screws off. These were pretty tight, so I ended up putting a adjustable wrench. Not an adjustable. What am I? A universal. I don't even know what this is called. Anyways, we're going to go ahead now and just take off this float bowl. I'm going to show you guys the process. Might be able to get it off with the screwdriver. Give me a moment here. See if we can turn this. Oh, actually it got loose. Okay. So the wrench helps. The wrench does help. All the leverage. Let's go ahead now. One-handed, baby. All right, we'll pop these loose. I'm going to show you guys how to clean a carb. So once we got our 2 float bowl screws off right here, pull the float bowl off. You can see there's a little bit of crud in there. So I'm going to go ahead, we're going to replace these float bowl gaskets because it was leaking from the gasket as well. I'm going to replace these, throw that in the pile. What I'm going to do now is pull off the 2 jets that are in here. So the 2 jets that are in the float bowl are the pilot jet, which is off this tube right here. It's actually deep inside, hard to see, and also hard to get to. And then we have our main jet right here. So usually what clogs up is the pilot jet. On a really bad scenario, it might be the main jet too. You can see this screwdriver right here has a little bit of slop. You want to preferably get a screwdriver that has no slop, so it's harder to strip, but we're just going to be really, really careful. These jets are brass, so you got to be very careful, especially if the carbs are, have ever been apart. The last owner probably cranked it down. Main jet looks good. What I do to check the jets is actually put it up to the light. So I'll go ahead. I doubt you can see it on camera, but you can see the hole is perfectly circular in the jet, and that's how you know nothing's clogging it. Because when they drill jets, the hole is circle. Hole is a circle. So go ahead, pop that back in. That was good. Now I gotta take a smaller screwdriver. These angles are probably really bad. sorry guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a lot of pressure down. This pilot jet's probably easier to strip. Putting a lot of pressure. There we go, pop loose. I don't know if you guys heard that. All right, now that it's loose, I'm gonna go ahead, flip the carb upside down. I gotta move this float tower out of the way, and the jet pops out. Okay, so here's our jet. This one, you can't really see light through it a little bit, but I'm gonna blow this one out with the air compressor. So we'll go over here. Got my air compressor all filled up. Got it on a nozzle. I'm just going to blow through the jet. That should be good. Do the light test. Yeah, now the hole is perfectly circular. So we know the jet is clear. Put this in. Same screwdriver. These are a little bit tricky. You might have to buy a special set of screwdrivers, or what I did is I just took mine down, took the sides down on the grinder, because not many screwdrivers that will fit the jet snug will also fit in this like tower hole, if that makes sense. Get that nice and snug. Verify this main jet. Plenty snug. Angles are probably shit, but what we want to do now is check our float height. Okay, so I just looked up my float height, and what I'm going to do now is put the carbs on a 45-degree angle, or thereabouts. So we'll get our carbs hoisted up. And what we're doing by putting the carbs on this angle is we're getting it so our float needle, so the float just rests on the float needle right here. Wait, it's just blurry. Thank you, GoPro. But now I got 14.6 millimeters marked up on my caliper. I'm gonna go ahead, get it to about a 45. That's about a 45 right there. It's about 45, and you can see it's about 14.6 on the dot actually. So our float height is perfect. I'm gonna go ahead now, clean up the float bowl, get all this crud out of here, get the crud off the mating surface for the float bowl around here, and yeah, just throw a new gasket in, throw the float bowl on, get these carbs wrapped up. Another thing we should check is I'll show you guys how to check the diaphragms, and we do that with an air compressor. And it's also a good idea to check these air idle control valves right here, or screws rather. So we'll also pull these out, probably just replace the O-ring that's in here. These tend to go, and then your idle's messed up, and that could be another reason for a leak. So those are the last two things to check, is the air idle control and also our diaphragms. So we're back. This is turning into like a 5-day build at this point, but we're just gonna go ahead now and test our diaphragms. So how I'm gonna do that is I got my air compressor hooked up over here. I just filled it up. We're gonna take a air nozzle, and I'm gonna set this to a constant pressure. Stick it right. Hollow body. Okay, so I have enough air now to open the slide about all the way. Diaphragm's open. Opening and staying. All 4 carbs. So what that lets us know right away is that our diaphragms are good, because if they were bad, they wouldn't be opening at the same rate or opening at all. So that's just a quick test I do to check if the diaphragms are bad. I had a good feeling that they were already all right because the bike was riding fine above a certain RPM range. So now that we verify our diaphragms are good, we're going to go ahead and check our air idle jets. So I'm going to pull these 4 air idle screws out and just replace the O-ring that's underneath these. And then once we replace the O-ring, we're going to have to set them to the factory setting, which I believe is 2.5 turns out from them being backed in all the way. So I'm going to go ahead now, loosen those up, and I'll explain it more once I get it apart. So I got my first air idle jet pulled out, and the air idle jet, if it'll focus in, there's 4 different parts. So we'll just pull it all apart now. So there's the main part, which is the needle right here. There's a spring that goes in right after. So the spring goes in to the needle just like this. Then your spring goes in, and then there's going to be a washer and an O-ring. Damn, this is mad blurry, but be careful on this washer right here, because it's not really one-sided, but it is. There's a more rounded side, and you always want the more rounded side to face the O-ring so it doesn't rip it when you turn it in and out. So even though my O-ring looks good right here, it is a little bit hard, so I'm going to go ahead and just replace the 4 O-rings that are underneath these, and then we're going to go ahead and set it back to the factory setting. So yeah, I'm going to do that now. Something I forgot to mention is it's also good practice to actually blow these out with an air compressor once we pull out our needle jet. So I'm going to go ahead now and just blow this out with the air compressor, just so it clears out any debris that might be stuck in there. Got a fresh fuel line and our carbs over here. Now we're going to move on to the bike. What I'm also doing is, as I mentioned before, I'm going to replace the O-rings that go on the intake boots that mate right to the head right here. I already got my first one off, and you could just see how flat they are. I mean, you can't even tell there's an O-ring in here, but there is. So I'm going to pop these out and replace these O-rings. Really, I should replace the boots. You can see them starting to crack a little bit on the sides right here, but the crack doesn't go all the way through, and it's really not that bad. So I'm going to go ahead and clean these up and just see how they look after I clean them up with some WD-40, and we'll just go from there. I think they should be good, but I guess we'll find out. This bike really does have a lot of like mildew or whatever you want to call it. It reminds me of a boat. Really reminds me of like a boat engine. I don't know where this thing sat, but hey, it runs good. So now moving on to the intake boots. So I just went ahead and actually pulled the side two off the right side. And what I'm doing here is there was an O-ring. I think I already went over this, but there's an O-ring that goes around these intake boots, and I just went ahead and replaced the O-ring in here. Actually, I think in the previous video I showed you guys how flat these O-rings sat in these intake boots. It looked like it was just one continuous surface, but you could obviously see it. There's an O-ring in here, and so I just went ahead and replaced this O-ring. I'm going to go ahead and put these intake boots back on. I think that was a point it was leaking from as well. You could see, like, I don't know if the camera would pick up on it, but there's kind of like fuel residue that's around this cylinder right here, so you could tell that it was just leaking all over. So I think while I'm at it, I'm also going to replace this O-ring that's in this oil gallery because I had to pull that off as well. It looks like someone probably used some sealant at some point. It's like peeling up over here. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead, do that, and we'll get back to it. We're quite a ways ahead right now, but I just got the carburetors back on. Replace those O-rings in the intake boots. I'm just going to get the airbox back in, get these pain in the ass airbox mounts in. Just throw the whole rear cowl back on, and we'll see if we can get it done before dark. That's what we're fighting right now. So see you guys in a minute. Starting to look like a real bike now. Got the airbox back on. Got the carbs all back on. Starting to look good. Got to get that rear cowl back on. We'll be ripping down into the nightfall. Got the crickets going, my only audience. Let's go. So while I was getting the fairings off, what I noticed is actually the tab broke off. This little mounting tab, and this pops right into this little frame grommet right here. That would normally pop in there, and it basically broke off, like you just saw there. So what I'm going to do now is take some JB Minute Weld. Just going to mix it up in this little platter I got, ripped off from a cereal bar box over there. And I'm just going to put it on this side, hold it on the fairing for a minute, and that should be repaired. So while I was getting the fairings off, what I noticed is actually the tab broke off. This little mounting tab, and this pops right into this little frame grommet right here. That would normally pop in there, and it basically broke off, like you just saw there. So what I'm going to do now is take some JB Minute Weld. Just going to mix it up in this little platter I got, ripped off from a cereal bar box over there. And I'm just going to put it on this side, hold it on the fairing for a minute, and that should be repaired. We're getting there done. Got the fairing back on. I gotta clean this up. I think right now I'm gonna take like 10-15 minutes, just clean everything off, get under this engine bay, and just get all this like mildew or whatever that nasty stuff is all out. And yeah, it's gonna be a good time to go ahead and, you know, just freshen everything up too, because it really does look like shit under here. We'll go ahead, we'll clean up all these wires, all this rear fender, all this nastiness. We're just gonna clean all that up. It's just gonna look neat after. So we got the bandit all done and cleaned up a little bit. Got it in the other room right now. I just took it for a ride. It's running pretty damn good. Got pretty low on gas, so a little sketchy towards the end, but we were able to just hop it home in a last-ditch effort. So it's looking good. Part 3 is coming up. Part 3 of this series, we're going to go ahead and put this against other $1,000 bikes, other bikes you think about getting. Put it up against, you know, newer sports bikes, other bikes your friends would be having. So yeah, part 3 is coming up. See you guys soon.